Just the other day, the partners at my firm pulled me aside and they were visibly upset about something that I had done. A portion of this video is sponsored by Vessi. More on them later in this video.
You made a decision that we didn't all agree on, and you were not being transparent about this.
Honestly, I did speak to everyone individually. Hey guys, my name's Dami and I'm an architect in beautiful Vancouver, BC. When I got that feedback, I cried. No, I'm just kidding. I had a lot of bad emotions. I had done my version of what I thought was right, and it really felt like I was being accused of being a bad architect and even a dishonest person. As I kind of progress into my career and also as I kind of build my YouTube business, I've been getting criticism of all kinds, including ones like this. And it's been really challenging to manage. So lately, I've been learning a lot about how to deal with criticism and feedback more effectively.
So today I want to talk about some of the things that I learned from the book, Thanks for the Feedback. In the first part of the video, I'm going to talk about how to receive that feedback. And in the second part of the video, I'm going to talk about how to navigate that feedback conversation and how to implement that feedback into your lives. And in the atrium, this is where you have your communal gatherings. It's a pretty model, but I don't think you're quite capturing the essence of the library as an institution, the ontology of the library. You know, a library is an institution of culture and history. And you expect people to just sit around here like that?
Handling feedback on your project is one thing, and handling feedback on your performance or your voice, that's a whole nother thing. And in fact, it is really important for you to categorize the different types of criticism. So there's 3 types of feedback. There's evaluation. That's where you talk about where you stand in relation to the expectations and to other people. There's coaching or advice, which is all about helping you improve. And I think a crit or like a performance review is probably somewhere in between those two. There's also appreciation or recognition or thanks, which basically lets you know that you're doing well and that your efforts are being noticed. So when you're asking for feedback, you actually want to be fairly clear on what you're looking for, just to prevent confusion or conflict from both parties. The hardest part about receiving feedback is actually the emotional response. And it's the emotional response which makes us angry or defensive. And a lot of the times we can get dismissive of that feedback. But if you identify what triggers those emotional responses, you can have much better control over those reactions. Dealing with criticism can take a toll on you. For me, whenever I feel overwhelmed, I like to go outside and spend some time in nature. But sometimes we don't always have dry weather or dry land. That's why today I want to talk to you about Vessi. Vessi shoes are 100% waterproof, they're stylish and comfortable, so you can wear them wherever you go. It's made from Dymatex, which is a dual climate knit material that keeps you cool in the heat and warm in the cold. But the best part is it really doesn't feel like the kind of shoes that'll be waterproof. They're super comfy, they hug my feet, they're extremely lightweight, and they're breathable. I love how I can wear them all season around, and I literally wear them everywhere. These are the only pair of shoes I need to pack, and they're so versatile and functional. And if you're someone who lives in a rainy climate, Vessi is a great investment in your closet. Get $25 off for each pair at vessi.com/DamiLee. Generally, there's 3 types of triggers. There's the truth triggers. So truth triggers are responses to feedback we feel is wrong or unhelpful or unfair. But as we know, everyone has their own idea of the truth. So the very, very first thing you want to do is, instead of thinking, no, that's wrong, or, oh, well, that makes sense for you, but not for me. You have to acknowledge that everyone thinks differently. And even if it's hard, try to ask yourself, like, what is right about what the other person's saying? At the same time, try to examine yourself for any blind spots in your thinking. There's behavior patterns. So we often have behaviors that are totally unknown to us, but others, they see it really clearly. A really good example is using filler words like or uhs or like that. Because they've been so embedded into your speech pattern that you don't even recognize that you do it. And for me, I only recognize that I do it a lot when I started making videos on YouTube. And another blind spot is typically like you judge your actions by the intent and others judge your actions on impact and especially how it impacts them. And paradoxically, when we come into challenging situations, we tend to attribute it to the circumstance, but other people tend to connect it to our character.
So it's come to my attention that you made a decision on the glazing frame colors that we didn't all agree on, and you were not being transparent about this. And if this keeps happening, this is the fastest way we're going to lose trust in you. I had to make that call. I was already so late on getting back to them, and I couldn't wait another week for us to all meet. And honestly, I did speak to everyone individually, and my understanding from the conversation was that we were all aligned on picking white.
We also have tells that we might not be aware of, like facial expressions or voice, and any other like non-verbal behaviors or like habits that can say the opposite thing of your intentions. There's also emotional distortion, when our emotional reaction to something is like way out of proportion to the content of the feedback. You can find some of these blind spots by observing how you get really defensive or recording yourself. You can also look for patterns in the feedback. Like if you're getting the same feedback from different people, you know that's an issue. And the second type of trigger is relationship triggers, which is an emotional response to the person more than the content of the feedback. So there's two main types of relationship triggers. One is our opinion of that person. So when we get negative feedback, we are subconsciously looking for ways to disqualify that person from giving that feedback. And then number two is how they treat us. So if you feel like they're not appreciating you or your efforts, or you feel like they don't have the authority, or you might just feel like that person doesn't really like you. And in situations like this, a very common response can be for us to respond with something that's like aimed at the person rather than the issue itself. And when this happens, it will split the conversation in two, and you just start talking about two completely different things. So for example, your roommate will say, "Oh, you're so messy." And you'll say something like, "Oh yeah, but you're so loud, like you leave the TV on till 2 a.m. and I can never sleep." And so it's very important for you to recognize this and actually address each one of these topics separately before they turn into bigger problems. And sometimes the conflict might not even be happening because of you or the other person, but because we're all a part of this system that defines our relationships. And you might have different values or habits, and you might have different roles in the relationship. So sometimes just like stepping back and like looking at the whole system as a whole can be really helpful. The next one is identity triggers. And these ones are a big one. Identity triggers can happen when the feedback doesn't align with your sense of who you are or the story that you tell about yourself. For me, like when I got that feedback from my bosses, a part of the reason why it stung so much was because it was an identity trigger.
And you were not being transparent about this. And if this keeps happening, this is the fastest way we're gonna lose trust in you.
I felt like it was an attack on my integrity and my capability as a person and as an architect. And, I consider myself to be a very transparent person. And that's kind of one of the things that I take a lot of pride in. And so my emotional response was probably kind of exaggerated compared to the issue at hand. And I think the best way to deal with identity triggers is just like adopting a growth mindset. A person with a growth mindset sees their traits as evolving.
You know what? I can improve that. Door, window, architecture.
But if you have a fixed mindset, you will see your abilities as stable and finished.
My voice is my personality. Stop watching my videos.
And there's actually ways you can develop a growth mindset by listening to feedback as coaching rather than evaluation or judgment. It's more about like how you're doing things and what you're doing rather than on you. Also, don't worry so much about how this is affecting the other person's opinion of you. In the end, it's really hard to change people's opinion of you, but it's really easy for you to change how you reflect on yourself. So just try to focus on that. Also, whenever you get feedback, try to evaluate yourself on how you're taking that feedback. Like if you can handle that feedback better than others, then appreciate yourself for that, because that in itself is a really positive trait that actually very few people have. Identity triggers are probably one of the most emotional out of all of these. So try to monitor your emotional reactions thoughtfully by trying to control your emotions, or even better, like trying to separate your emotions from the facts. I also have my own kind of strange strategy for this. So whenever I'm in a bad situation or I get bad feedback, I imagine myself as like a character in a comedy movie or in a sitcom. And I just kind of proceed to deal with the issue at hand. Yes, it is important to adopt a growth mindset, but there are certain things that are just like outside of your control, like how others feel about you. And especially after you do your best to remedy the situation, if they still have a negative feeling towards you, just let it go and just try to be zen about it. Because it's a waste of your time and your energy to keep thinking about things that are outside of your control. Now that we've identified the triggers and we kind of understand how to control them, how do we navigate those conversations and get the most out of that feedback? Douglas Stone defines 3 phases of a feedback conversation: the open, the body, and the close. The open is before the content of the feedback. It's where you get aligned with the other person by trying to understand what kind of feedback is this and what's the intent behind this feedback. Is this evaluation? Is this coaching? Is this appreciation? And also trying to understand who has the final word and is this feedback negotiable? If you're working for someone, your boss, in most cases, has the final word. No matter how right you think you are, in the end, it does kind of come down to this. You are there by choice. You agreed to the deal. You work for them and they are paying you to represent the firm. And obviously there's a lot of nuance to this, but that's the kind of systems framework that you have to consider. And then there's the body. The body is the content of the feedback, or like the meat of the talk. And to get the most out of this feedback, you need to listen. That's something that I'm really trying to work on. Try to really pay attention to what the other person's saying. And while you're doing this, listen to your own internal voice and try to watch for the triggers that we talked about. And then clarify. You can always ask for specificities or specifics on expectations or consequences. And you can also add your own input and try to explain the situation in your own thoughts and in your observations. You can also talk about your interpretations on things or your feelings. You can also try to referee the conversation, try to diagnose and describe the communication problems as they come up so that you can kind of propose solutions in real time. And the last stage of that is the close. That's where you clarify the commitments and expectations and the follow-up. You know, who's gonna do what specifically when you leave the meeting? Are there like benchmarks or consequences if you don't meet those benchmarks? And are you gonna be having regular check-ins? Then the last but the most important step is actually incorporating the feedback. Try to focus on one thing at a time, or test it with small experiments, and make sure you really understand what the other person's trying to say. You can give yourself rewards for making these changes, or you can also add consequences for not making these changes. Also, try to make the other person feel valued by taking their advice. And later, they are gonna come to you for advice. In conclusion, what's interesting, but also really true, is that negative feedback, if you know how to handle it, it can actually have a much more positive impact on your life than positive impact. Think about an architecture project, right? If you get really positive feedback, then at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to know where to take that. But when you have a really bad crit, you might cry, but you have so many different ways you can take your project afterwards, right? So try to really use this feedback to your advantage and really make something of it. All right, guys, so I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, or if you have any strategies for dealing with negative feedback. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you like this type of content, subscribe to the channel. I'm always making videos once every week. Also, I have a Discord channel if you want to pop in there and ask questions. It's full of students and professionals from all over the world. And yeah, with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!
Did you read the books I told you to read?